Okay, so we have reached an off day. The second off day of camp is Wednesday, at least since we've been there. So I figured let's try and throw out some names that have stood out to us. Stood out to us in a good way, stood out to us in a bad way. Let's come up with some guys that we've noticed one way or the other, and let's chat about them for a little bit here as we reach sort of a breaking point in camp, I think. Mary Kay, get us started. Give us a name.
You know, one of the names I've been thinking about lately is Chad Thomas, the Browns defensive end. Chad Thomas has kind of been falling down the depth chart a little bit. Now, today, he actually left practice with a neck injury, and we don't know the extent of the neck injury yet, but leading up to that, I think he was almost in a precarious position on the team, where it just seemed like he was going to almost have to fight for his job. Whenever they put a backup guy in there, it went, it's going Porter Gustin and, then you've got Adrian Claiborne. He was out with a groin injury today too. But it just seems like Chad Thomas is kind of falling back a little bit. And I think that he's someone that's going to really need to step it up if he can, have to step it up and finish strong to survive that September 5th cut.
That is not the name I expected to hear first.
I'm not picking a guy who I think has really stood out in great ways, but he's definitely stood out as far as visibility, and that's JoJo Nansen, wide receiver, kick returner. The Browns picked him up as a free agent, and it was pretty much expected that he was going to be probably the guy to beat in terms of kick return and punt return this year, just from the fact that they went out and got someone like that. And that's certainly been the case as far as the return game goes. He's number one in order and when they're doing reps for returns. It seems like he probably has that locked down. I don't know how you knock him out of that with no preseason games, But I think the thing that's really stood out to me is how he's used as a receiver. He has gotten a lot of first-team reps, a lot of reps in the slot when they've had Landry and Beckham out there with him. Which kind of surprised me because this is a guy who in 2 years has had 2 catches in the NFL. He really wasn't used much by the Rams as an actual receiver. But he seems to be getting every opportunity to try to prove to the Browns that he can produce as a receiver.
I'll go with a guy that has to stand out because he's a guy we're all watching very closely. I think Jedrick Wills has stood out. Not because he's been awful, but because I think we're seeing real growing pains with Jedrick Wills, and we're seeing some issues. He hasn't exactly locked guys down at that left tackle position. It's still very early. The offense as a whole is struggling, but certainly early in camp, it has stood out that Jedrick Wills is still kind of growing into that position.
I'm going to go with Kevin Johnson. He's out right now with a lacerated liver, but it was really good to see him back. He's back conditioning, and I think he's going to be back on the field pretty early on in the season. I think he'll only miss a couple of games, if that. He'll probably miss one for sure, maybe those first 2, but I think he'll be back at some point, perhaps even in the first quarter of the season. And that's good. That's important. They need all the defensive backs they can get right now, but he was very key in the nickel. And he was showing up. He was making plays. He was playing kind of like a veteran, and he was being very aggressive. And I think that, that they need a little bit more of that. I think he was helping to set the tone in the defensive backfield. I've seen him force a fumble. I've seen him grab an interception. I've seen him breaking up passes, and he was on the field a lot. And just somebody that I thought was having a really nice camp when he suffered that injury.
How did we get this far without naming Harrison Bryant as a player who stood out? Did I steal one off your list there, Dan?
You did. That's all right. I got a long list.
Okay. He definitely lives up to the hype as a receiver. He catches everything. I mean, he's looked really good. And I think a lot of people, when the whole David Njoku, I want to be traded thing went down, I think it was easy to look at Harrison Bryant and think maybe that was one of the reasons, because the Browns went out and drafted a very prolific college tight end to come in and play in this offense that we know uses multiple tight ends. I had someone email me today saying that Njoku should have been on my bubble list. I don't think he'll be cut, but I think it's definitely open for Harrison Bryant to come in and take his spot based on what we've seen so far and knowing how David Njoku's had drop issues in the past. So Harrison Bryant, to me, has really stood out.
I think Austin Hooper. I think he's lived up to the hype. I think he's been very good. I think you watch him out there, and it's easy to think, all right, this guy's going to catch a ton of footballs this year, and he might end up leading this team in receptions. So I think Austin Hooper so far, he had a drop today. And again, I think it's telling you see that drop, and you're like, I can't believe that was 81, because he's been just Mr. Reliable. During this camp where this offense has struggled so much, Austin Hooper has been one of the bright spots along with Harrison Bryant. So I think Austin Hooper is a guy that, you wouldn't call him a riser or anything like that, but he is a guy that has lived up to the hype and stood out to me as like, okay, this was probably going to end up being a pretty good signing.
Well, once again, I always feel so bad when I steal this one from you, Dan, but I mean, you got to have Kareem Hunt on the list of guys that stand out, that have stood out so far. And again, once again, I've mentioned this before on this pod, but Dan got a hold of his track coach from Willoughby South, did a great story on him about, running those hills and what it took for Kareem Hunt to get in shape. You can find that obviously on cleveland.com, but he has looked tremendous. He's looked really good. He looks locked into me. That's the way that Kevin Stefanski described Harrison Bryant, but Kareem looks really, really, really locked in, loaded, ready to go, catching balls out of the backfield, running through the whistle, giving these guys a great look, run for their money. Got a lot of first team reps when Nick Chubb was out with the concussion. Now you see them together on the field. And I just think it has the potential to be a really big year for him.